I'm Senator McCarthy. I am the acting chair for today's inquiry. I do have a general opening statement to make before I go to you both, and just acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Larrakia country here in Darwin, and I acknowledge also my fellow senators, Senator Davey and also Senator Tony, who are on the inquiry with me today. I declare open this public hearing of the Senate Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport References Committee. The committee is hearing evidence for its inquiry into the Water Legislation Amendment, Inspector General of Water Compliance and Other Measures Act 2021. I certainly welcome you all here today. This is a public hearing and a Hansard transcript of the proceedings is being made. Before the committee starts taking evidence, I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It's unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. The committee prefers all evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in private session. It is important that witnesses give the committee notice if they intend to ask to give evidence in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which the objection is taken. The committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground that is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request the answer be given in camera. Such a request may, of course, also be made at any other time. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. I particularly draw the attention of witnesses to an order of the Senate of 13th of May 2009 specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. Witnesses are specifically reminded that a statement that information or a document is confidential or consists of advice to government is not a statement that meets the requirements of the 2009 order. Instead, witnesses are required to provide some specific indication of the harm to the public interest that could result from the disclosure of the information or the document. If you agree to provide an answer to a question taken on notice during this hearing, please note that answers are due by close of business Thursday, the 25th of November. I also remind people to ensure their mobile phones are either turned off or switch to silent, and also a reminder with our Zoom capacity to please place your Zooms on mute if you're not speaking. I now welcome representatives from the Conservation Council South Australia and Goulburn Valley Environmental Group via video conference. For the Hansard, could you please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today? And I might go to South Australia Conservation Council first.
Yes, good morning and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Craig Wilkins. I'm the Chief Executive of the Conservation Council of South Australia.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Pettigrew, we've had a bad start there, just in terms of the IT. Would you like to try that again?
John Pettigrew.
All right, look, I certainly couldn't hear you. Can I just firstly suggest, Mr. Pettigrew, that you just turn your video off and see if you can just do it by sound.
John Pettigrew.
I certainly can't hear you, and I'm not sure if other senators can. No. Mr. Pettigrew, you may wish to just switch off, go back out, and maybe come back on. And in the meantime, I might.
Does that make a difference? Can you hear me now?
Oh, wonderful! That is wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. John Pettigrew. I chair the Golden Valley Environment Group, more commonly known as GVEG.
Terrific. Thank you. Do either of you wish to make an opening statement, Mr. Wilkins?
I do, but I've had a quick chat with John before today just to line up our discussions, and he is keen to go first. So I'll pass it over to John, perhaps.
Sure. Mr. Pettigrew, if you'd like to go make an opening statement.
Thanks very much, Senator. Look, I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm presenting from today, the Yorta Yorta Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. My background, I'm chair of the Golden Valley Environment Group. My background is horticulture, fruit growing all our lives in the Golden Valley here in Victoria. A long association with irrigation from an irrigation point of view, from management point of view with Golden Murray Water, and from a resource management point of view as a board member of the Golden Broken Catchment Management Authority. GVEG welcomes the establishment of the Inspector General for Water Compliance. The implementation of the Basin Plan has over the past decade brought to light abuses of power and corruption across much of the basin, which cannot be ignored. The effectiveness of this role will depend on three key factors in our view: how the Inspector General chooses to exercise his discretion, the ongoing independence of the office, and the provision of appropriate resources to do the job. When announcing the interim Inspector General in 2019, Minister Littleproud announced the position would be, and I quote, a tough new cop on the beat across the Murray-Darling with the powers needed to ensure integrity in delivery of the Basin Plan. The Inspector General will be required to hold the MDBA, Commonwealth, and all basin states to account. GVEG is concerned that having the Inspector General's office located within the Commonwealth Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment will result in a conflict of interest. Water management is often a highly politicised topic, and therefore having this role placed within a department can negate its independence. Independence is critical to maintain the confidence of the communities. GVEG acknowledges the broad discretion and flexibility of the position, however questions what happens also if the Inspector General chooses not to exercise that discretion. We think there should be more obligation from the Inspector General to investigate allegations. Notwithstanding Mr. Grant's past experience in law enforcement, GVEG were disappointed that the role to deliver the highest accountability for water use was awarded to a member of the National Party and ex-Premier of New South Wales. Perception is everything in the delivery of the Basin Plan and water matters across the basin, and we think there was a missed opportunity here in the inaugural filling of this position. It's just a shame that was missed. GVEG also recommends that the penalties for illegal water extraction be increased really dramatically to reflect the crime, and often the penalties are of a lesser value than even the value of the water being taken in many cases, and we see that also as a problem. I'll hand over to Mr. Wilkins to finish our presentations.
Thank you, Mr. Pettigrew, and thank you, Senators. Conservation Council of South Australia concurs with the previous witnesses' description of first welcoming the establishment of the Inspector General for Water Compliance. It is a welcome step, and this idea of having a new level of oversight and accountability to an area which has been the subject of concern in the past can only be a good step. However, we also share the concerns around getting the rules right and getting the culture right around this process. So the key aspect for us is also around the level of independence of this role. And this independence is particularly important in relation to possible allegations involving Commonwealth water officials. So the concept of having an internal sort of firewall between different parts of the same department, in practice, I think doesn't go far enough in terms of reassuring the public that there is true independence, both in terms of the rules in place and also the culture. Equally, we would like to emphasise the importance of the office being appropriately resourced to conduct in-depth investigations into allegations of non-compliance. It is possible, if there is inadequate resourcing, for this to be a more of a tick-a-box exercise rather than a genuine oversight enterprise. And it is the idea of having a genuine oversight which is of interest to us. And equally, as Mr. Pettigrew says, there is necessity to get the rules right in terms of how the Inspector General chooses to exercise his discretion. We really would like to emphasise or include a positive duty to ensure that he and or a future office holder functions consistently with the international treaties that underpin the Water Act. And so there is a positive duty to follow through on that. And then there's just a couple of other areas we think that could be improved in terms of the rules, such as a greater requirement for transparency and for publicly sharing the information that is underway, for better reporting publicly of the inquiries, and for instance, in their annual report, requirements to be strengthened so that there's more specific content, so that there is a bias towards more information rather than less. I think I can leave that there and welcome questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilkins. I might just go to a couple of questions first and then to Senator Davey, but I do have quite a few questions. Senator Davey, if I could just kick off. Can I just follow on with your statement there, Mr. Wilkins, just on the positive duty aspect? So you do agree with the suggestion that the Inspector General should be subject to a positive duty to exercise those functions consistently with the Water Act?
Yes. Yes, our organisation's position is that having clearer or more explicit positive duties as part of the rule book that the Inspector General follows increases the confidence of the public that this is a genuine attempt to increase accountability.
So should the Inspector General be required to investigate all complaints unless vexatious? Just listening to both yours and Mr. Pettigrew's statements, you've obviously raised concerns around the scope. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, certainly. We believe that there should be a requirement to investigate all complaints, as you say, that there may be vexatious ones, and that's quite appropriate for them to be not involved in this discussion. But any valid complaint should be investigated, and that ensures a consistent application of the law. It also ensures that complaints that are valid but are not necessarily politically convenient are also investigated and cannot be ignored.
So the consistency of the application of the law, is that what you would see as a benefit to this occurring?
Yes, if the rules are very clear and explicit, if there is an appropriate level of independence, if there is an appropriate level of resourcing, that enables an Inspector General to exercise their duties without fear or favour, with confidence that they can investigate appropriately and follow up all concerns and deal with it appropriately.
And you mentioned appropriately resourced. Clearly, any lack of resourcing would not enable that.
Yeah, that certainly is one of our key concerns. Any office is only as good as the ability to follow through on its tasks with appropriate resourcing. And so, if there is this approach from the government to increase compliance and accountability, then it should be matched by appropriate resourcing.
You've spoken about independence of both you and Mr. Pettigrew, and please, Mr. Pettigrew, if you wish to add or also respond to these questions, let me know. The Inspector General is supported by the Office of Water Compliance, both of which sit within the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment portfolio. Does this provide sufficient independence?
I'm happy for Mr. Pettigrew to go first, and then I can respond.
This is part of our concerns, that there is not that independence, not that real independence, with them being included in that department, with those departments, and it's perception as well as the practical running of the office. And no, it's a real concern to us.
So how would you, and I know you did raise it in your statement about perception as well, but how would you suggest improving the independence?
I think it has to be a separate department, organisation, or associated with some department that isn't closely associated with water or resource management.
Okay,
Yes, yes, we would certainly concur with that. We think the most appropriate course of action is to establish a separate legislated Office of Compliance independent of all other government agencies.
The Minister for Water indicated in his second reading speech that ethical walls would be established to maintain the Inspector General's independence. Do you foresee any issues with that?
Very, in my experience, very difficult to achieve.
And certainly, yeah, we would concur with that, and emphasise that there is the reality, and then there is the perception, and part of the strength of this role is to re-establish confidence in the full delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and compliance with the Water Act. And so if there is going to be a perception in the community that somehow the Inspector General lacks the culture or the ability to appropriately investigate, then that's going to undermine public confidence in this process.
Can I go to the area of penalties? We've received evidence that penalties under the Act are not commensurate to the harm caused. Do you agree with this?
My past experience with not just what's happening now, but in the past as a board member of Goulburn Murray Water, penalties are always a problem, and putting the cases through the courts are even a bigger problem. There's a tendency to leniency in almost all cases, and from past experience, the penalties have been insufficient to even cover the value of often the water that's been illegally taken.
Is there any particular example you wish to provide to the committee, Mr. Pettigrew, or are you just speaking generally?
No, look, I have no particular example here, but numerous cases over the years through Goulburn Murray Water, Victoria's chief head irrigation area.
Mr. Wilkins?
Yeah, I don't have any specific examples. I do know that the Environmental Defender's Office is recommending that penalties should be set perhaps at a rate of 3 times the benefit obtained in order to provide both a punitive and a deterrent function, and we would support that.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to go to Senator Perrin, but I'm not too sure if she's there. So, Senator Perrin? All right, I might just keep going while we're waiting for Senator Perrin to come back. Are you aware of the amendments moved by the Nationals in the Senate on June 23? Either of you?
No, I'm personally not Senator.
No, sorry, I'm not familiar with them either.
Okay, no, that's fine. So the committee's received evidence that the role of the Inspector General could be strengthened by adopting some of the features of other legislation concerning compliance and enforcement, anti-corruption and commissions of inquiry. Do you agree with this? And if so, what powers do you think the Inspector General should have?
Well, I think the answer has to be yes, the position could be strengthened. I think it's working on that independence. I think the independence of the office would make the biggest difference of all. So I'll be concentrating in that area.
And we would agree as well. There has been legislation establishing anti-corruption watchdogs and other commissions of inquiry at a state and territory level and also a Commonwealth level. And this should be seeking to import best practice around independence and rigour into this regime.
Okay. I just want to ask a general question, and I am conscious that Senator Perrin's not there, and so I'm going to just go to a few more questions in the hope that Senator Perrin, I was just going to go to a few questions, but I'll hand over to you now.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just had to take a very urgent call. I have been listening all morning though, and I thank you both for attending and giving your feedback to us. I'm interested in getting a better understanding from you about how you see the role of Inspector General working with the states, because much of the role is looking at or investigating people who are taking water when not permitted under state law. So there's a lot of interdependence between the two jurisdictions, and also getting an understanding. I live in New South Wales. We've got the Natural Resource Access Regulator who is in charge of doing investigations in New South Wales where there are claims of water theft. I'm I don't have a clear line of sight of what the protocol is in South Australia, and I believe Goulburn and Murray do their own investigations, Mr. Pettigrew. So how do you see the interoperability of the role of the Inspector General and the states?
I'll go first if you like. Yes, I see it as a role of coordination and of ensuring that the hard questions are asked to those states, Senator. I think if there's a gap in the areas that we're concerned with at the moment, it's that linking. The MDBA didn't pull it off. They didn't achieve that. Our hope is that this role will achieve that, and I anticipate that the issues will be sourced from around the basin. They won't just be water theft. There'll be other procedural issues, processes that'll be questioned. The implementation of the basin plan, aspects of that will be questioned, and I see the role as being critical to coordinating those investigations, inquiries.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. It's actually a really good question, because it's I suppose it gets to the heart of the intention behind the bill. It is to emphasise the national interest around the full delivery of the Water Act, and so if there are particular jurisdictions which are not fulfilling their part of the deal in terms of ensuring a healthy and sustainable Murray-Darling Basin, then having an opportunity to investigate appropriately and call to account and keep the confidence amongst the other jurisdictions in terms of the full delivery of the Water Act.
On mute, Senator.
You're right, I am. One of us had to do it. I want to pick up on what you were talking about, Mr. Pettigrew, in that the role is bigger than just water theft, and I really appreciate you highlighting that, because that is a crucial element of the role. Looking at procedural and implementation of the basin plan, I am interested. We know that the states all have their different water laws, their different account management, how they manage accounts, how they determine, for example, in New South Wales, irrigators can't go into a negative account balance, but in South Australia they can, and then so long as they balance the account before the end of the quarter, and I believe in Lower Murray in Victoria that's also allowable. Do you think those things need to be looked at as well?
I would like to see them included. I think the examples you've given won't be around for too much longer. There's certainly loopholes that should have been addressed years ago, and I don't think we'll see those issues continuing on. But no, those sort of issues undermine communities' confidence in the delivery of water, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and someone has to call those out.
And when it comes to delivery and this role, I'm certainly very aware, both in my area and in the Goulburn Murray, there are concerns about riverbank degradation due to the pressure that's being put on the system with the delivery demands, both environmental and operational. Do you think there is a role for the Inspector General not only to be looking at consumptive water users and their behaviour, but also looking at government agencies, their behaviour, including the environmental water holder, in how their orders, their operation, whether they're being compliant, whether they're measuring appropriately to ensure that it's sort of truly independent and not just focusing on one group.
The concerns you're outlining there are mainly attributable to water trading, particularly from upstream to downstream developments, and some of the damage has been caused to rivers like the Goulburn and Murray. This is a real issue, and that the impacts we're seeing are really due to those excess water being required to be put down the rivers. I don't know who brings the states together to get some sense in the development, the new developments that are going on in each state. All states are guilty when it comes to approving and encouraging new developments that are causing this problem. But I would love to think that this role could bring those states together, but it's certainly required.
And just coming back to the penalty issue that you've both raised, again, it comes into the interoperability with the state jurisdictions. I understand the penalties are under the Inspector General's legislation, but each state also has its separate penalties. Have you considered the fact that someone could face both levels of penalty, or do you worry that by introducing a layer of Commonwealth legislation over and above, that we may actually be sort of putting a ceiling on it, so the state will say, well, we don't need to prosecute or penalise because it's being done at the federal level? Now you're on mute, Mr. Pettigrew.
Thanks for that. My experience in the Goulburn Valley and Goulburn Murray Water, I think those organisations would need to maintain their role to maintain confidence of their customers. So there's going to have to be a dual role there. It's a matter of the penalties really reflecting the issue at the time, and our concern is that they haven't in the past. But I would say that even if the Inspector General didn't have necessarily the power to raise those penalties within states, he could still do a lot to influence those penalties by calling them out.
Thank you very much. That's all I have for the moment. Thanks, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. I think they are the questions we have for both of you this morning. I know Senator Ciccone is on the line, but I haven't received any request for questions from him. So on that note, Mr. Wilkins and Mr. Pettigrew, we'll let you go.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm just checking. Have we got representatives from the Healthy Rivers Lower Murray Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales and Lifeblood Alliance via video conference with us?
Not quite yet, Chair. We may want to suspend just for a minute until we get them online.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll suspend for 5 minutes. And open the committee. So is Hansard okay?
Yes, yes, we're all good to go.
Thank you, Jerry. I now welcome representatives from the Healthy Rivers Lower Murray Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales and Lifeblood Alliance via video conference. Can I just firstly acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Larrakia country. I'm Senator McCarthy, the acting chair. We also have on the committee Senator Davey and also Senator Ciccone. I'm going to go to each of you to introduce yourselves and the capacity in which you appear today, and certainly invite you after each of you have identified yourselves to make an opening statement. I might go to you first, Dr. Jensen.
Good morning, Senator. I apologise, I don't appear to be able to put my camera on.
We can hear you fine, so
Okay. Thank you. I believe that you have my opening statement in front of you.
I do have some paperwork here in front of me, but you're very welcome.
Yes.
Yep.
I'm hearing audio from you. Is that correct?
Yes, it's Senator McCarthy speaking to you. Can you hear me? Dr. Jensen? We seem to have lost Dr. Jensen. I might go to you, Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Senator. I'm coming I'm on the lands of the Wiradjuri Nation today, here in Dubbo, on the banks of the Wambool River. And I'm representing the Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales. We're very glad to have this opportunity to give evidence this morning. We're grateful for this hearing and any attention that water management receives is gratefully received by the Nature Conservation Council. It's an area that is especially, it's highly contested area. It's very politicized, and it's quite subject to claims of maladministration as well. It's a very critical element, of course. Water is incredibly critical for all life. So we're especially keen to do what we can to encourage transparency in all water management. As this particular piece of legislation, our focus is to ensure that there's enough independence and resourcing around the new office for it to be effective. So while we support the creation of the role of the Inspector General and the division of compliance away from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority into its own office, we do have some suggestions on how the system could be strengthened. We believe that the entire Office of Water Compliance should be legislated, not just the role of the Inspector General. And we would also like to see the office completely separate from the Water Agency. At the moment, it's under the department door, but for complete transparency and absolute the best chance of political independence, we'd like to see the office not only completely legislated, but separate from the Water Agency. There's another bit of an issue that we see with this piece of legislation is that there's no repercussions to the Office of the Inspector General should they fail to investigate bona fide cases of non-compliance and water theft. Now, if water theft has irreparable damage on environmental assets such as a Ramsar wetland, we don't feel that there's strong enough legal levers between the Water Act and the failure to act by any Inspector General in that role. So there are international treaties that underpin the Water Act, And we don't see that there's like I just said, there's a strong enough legal lever between those international treaties of the Water Act and the role of the Inspector General. Anything, there could be more requirements for reporting from the Inspector General, and more, he could be required to report the directions that he's subject to as well. That would be in the public interest to see that information. And a common thing that we find and that we are always pushing for is stronger penalties in any of these cases where water is stolen. We find in New South Wales here particularly that the penalties aren't commensurable with the damage that can be done, and certainly that the rewards for, or the financial benefit for stealing the water isn't enough of a deterrent to stop the theft happening, and irreversible damage to wetlands is something that the community is shouldn't have to suffer. And another important thing is the resourcing of the office. There needs to be assured, proper, guaranteed resourcing moving forward, that the work can be done without political compromise. So I'll thank you for that opportunity.
Thanks, Ms. Gray. Can I go to you, Mr. Newman?
Yes, Senators, thank you very much for this opportunity to present to you. I'm speaking to you today from Kaurna country in South Australia. Our focus, I've tabled a supplementary submission in addition to our original one, quite late. Hopefully you had a chance to have a look at it, but I'll draw through those threads as rapidly as I can. This submission complements other submissions that we've worked closely with, including people on the speaker today. Healthy Rivers Lower Murray is a growing independent group, primarily based in Adelaide. We focus along of our normal business along the river corridor from Mildura to the Murray mouth. But we really have a very strong commitment to the overall delivery of the basin plan across the whole basin. We're particularly concerned about issues in the northern basin on the Lower Darling, for example. So we do see the basin as a whole, and we very much look at that. My own personal background is involved with hydrology and river management over decades. Having worked and lived in the Riverland and in Canberra. So I sort of have a fairly, water literacy is a strong point with me, but we recognise that it's not a strong point with so many others. And really that's a big challenge for the implementation of the basin plan. Today we're going to focus less on the issue of water theft that's being dealt with quite adequately by others, and more broadly on the issue of support for the basin plan, in particular support for the implementation at the jurisdictional level. So we note that the findings of the Productivity Commission was to split the functions of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and get compliance into a completely autonomous body, and we support the points already made about independence and separate business operations from other institutions and agencies. If we look back at when the Office of the Inspector General was appointed, we're conscious of a need for the oversight of the performance of functions and exercise of powers by Commonwealth basin state agencies under the Water Act and regulations and delivery of the basin plan and the state water resource plans. So that's all about the relationships between state and Commonwealth agencies, and it's probably in that area that we have been frustrated. I mean, water theft is a clearly major issue, but we're focusing on that interaction between the agencies, the delivery of the programs, the dependence of the components of the programs upon each other, and therefore if you let one program slip, such as the constraints relaxation, it does create big deficiencies in the delivery of other outcomes, such as the delivery of environmental water. Now, so we originally gave you 3 recommendations. I think they've been highlighted already today and in other submissions. At the bottom of that statement that you've got there today are a further 8 sort of more detailed components, and I will come to that briefly in a moment, but that's essentially what we're asking you to consider, those further 8 sub-recommendations, if you like. And why are we thinking about that? In the context of basin plan implementation, there's been a whole lot of deficiencies. And examples of that dot pointed there. There's about a dozen or so in that list, but I would perhaps highlight a couple of them. A big one in our mind is the inadequate public scrutiny of investment decisions. So we see governments, in a sense, diverging from the original objectives of the plan and making the investment decisions, big decisions, that are not necessarily, are certainly not transparently consistent with the basin plan. And we would hope that an Inspector General and his office would look at that continuously and look at the whether or not all decisions are in the context of the basin plan, or perhaps should be looked at from a more sort of a collaborative government approach, with perhaps funding arrangements jointly funding from, say, regional development, as opposed to the water aspects set out in the Water Act and the 2012 Basin Plan. Another one that's a hot topic at the moment is this assessment of the growth in floodplain harvesting in the Northern Basin. That's a very critical element to achieve connectivity throughout the basin. There used to be regular flows below Menindee Lakes into the Lower Darling, and we saw by the experience of the Fishkill how those regular flows have dried up. Now, drought was blamed as the major contributor in the public domain, but when we look carefully at the hydrology, it is not just drought, but the abstraction well upstream in the Northern Basin that prevented those minimal inflows that just kept Menindee Lakes working in the way it was intended. Climate change is going to make that even more difficult. So there are a number of specific issues that we would feel would fall into the domain of an Inspector General, and they're not they're grievances, shall we say, grievances sometimes from irrigators, sometimes from communities, and often, from our point of view, from those that represent the ecological health of the basin. Now, so what we're hoping for is that grievances can be brought forward, and that the Inspector General will have a look at that and say, is this a Murray-Darling Basin Plan issue or not? Is it in the domain of one of the agencies or arrangements that are in place and should be dealt with and hurried along? And sort of to keep pushing for delivery of those agreed commitments that have been made over very strongly in 2012 and supplemented in past occasions. So let's go to the 8 recommendations. So I've just made the point about looking at all decisions, including investment, but also particularly the process for adoption of statutory plans. Now, I presume that remains in the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's domain, but are they looking at it as carefully as perhaps they should? So that's what we would see the Inspector General looking at, the process of endorsing and adopting those state statutory plans. They are so important for the operation of the whole basin plan and the whole Murray Darling Basin arrangements. But look beyond irrigator environment issues and look into some of the socio-economic matters, and they're rather more difficult to untangle from a whole range of other pressures that are on water users, markets, drought. They're real-time, short-term, but in our observation, so many of those pains that the irrigation community have felt have not been directly associated with the basin plan, the Murray Darling Basin arrangements or the basin plan implementation. They're things that just came along, and it was very convenient to blame, say, the pain of the dairy industry on the basin plan because they chose to be those that voluntarily gave up some of their water. It's already been mentioned this morning about the office being adequately resourced and having the right range of skills, and I've made some comments there. Which else do we focus on?
Mr. Newman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I might just hold you there because I know you're going through the 8 points that you provided to the senators, and we do have a copy of that. I know we'd like to ask you questions. Do you mind if I just see if Dr. Jensen is still on the line first, and then we might just come back to you?
Fine, that's fine. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Secretary, I've just checked if Dr. Jensen had come back.
Yes, Senator, can you hear me?
I can. Dr. Jensen, I'd like to just go to you and give you an opportunity just for a couple of minutes to give us your thoughts, and then we'll go to questions to each of you.
Yes, thank you. Very frustrating that I couldn't join you by video link, but thank you for the time. I'm representing the Lifeblood Alliance, which is a mostly volunteer network right across the basin. We have members that span landowners, farmers, irrigators, fishermen, and ecologists, First Nations, all sorts of different areas covering so many different interests. And we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners across that wide span and their continuing care for country. I've given you quite a detailed statement, and I understand you have a copy. So I'd just like to highlight out of that the Lifeblood Alliance welcomes the Water Amendment Legislation Act and the creation of the independent Inspector General. We think that's a very important step. Certainly addresses the concerns raised by the Productivity Commission about powers and trying to reduce the potential for conflict of interest. So we think it's a very important piece of legislation, but we do have some suggestions about ways in which we think it could be strengthened. And I have given you a list of points there, 7 different points of things that we think could be added. And one of the things we particularly like to raise is the idea of the single point of truth that was recommended by the interim Inspector General, and his concern that individuals across the basin need to be able to readily see and understand the way available water has been shared, and therefore reduce the confusion and the misconceptions and the community anger that we see about water issues and misunderstandings about how much water is available. But we see that as being a very important point. And as part of that the Inspector General might be providing annual publication of reporting on progress towards the targets in the plan that Bob was speaking about, reporting on whether we are achieving an environmental sustainable level of take, reporting on whether we are returning sufficient water for the health of the rivers. For example, the water holdings by CHU, the Office of the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, on paper, they have approximately 2,800 gigalitres of water, but in reality, they're only been delivering an average of 1,100 gigalitres of water because of the way the allocations and entitlements work. So it would be really helpful to have the Inspector General providing that sort of information that would inform the community and hopefully reduce the amount of anxiety and mistrust that we see. The point's been made about the Inspector General being truly independent and adequately resourced, and we strongly endorse that. The other point I'd like to just raise in passing, in the explanatory memorandum, there seemed to be a great emphasis on the rights of farmers to water, but there was no mention there on the need for water to sustain the rivers in a sufficient state of health that they could then sustain the farmers and the industries, and no mention at all of cultural flows. We saw that as being an omission. So just in conclusion, we think it's very critical that the connection between sustaining relatively healthy rivers is absolutely fundamental to then maintaining basin communities, the human communities and their livelihoods. And that needs to be a basic thread in all the work of the Inspector General. So we hope that you will consider our suggestions for strengthening the legislation, and we look forward to working with a truly independent Inspector General. Thank you.
So thank you. I'll go to you, Senator Davey, this time, and then I'll come to questions after you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the three organisations for appearing before us today and for the submissions that you've made, and also for providing us with your opening statements in written format. It certainly makes our job a lot easier. To the Lifeblood Alliance, with regards to reporting, and you've, Dr. Jensen, you have provided quite a comprehensive list, and from the outset, anything that increases accountability and transparency is to be applauded. It's just I'm just trying to work out the right, and I know the single source of truth that the Interim Inspector General recommended, and I know there's it is an issue that gets raised time and time again, and it's something that we've certainly got to work out how to do it properly. But when it comes to publication of annual water audits which track river flows and extractions, at the moment, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority produce a weekly report, which basically outlines the river flows of the Southern Connected System. That, and as a weekly report, it provides more real-time access to data of how much water is in the system or travelling through the system at any given week. Do you think that is insufficient? Do you think that there needs to be a sort of an annual audit of that? Is that what you're proposing?
What the need that I'm seeing, and I've seen this in a Water Advisory Committee that I'm on, yes, there's lots and lots of information there. There's oceans of information on websites and in reports, but in order to understand and interpret it, even with my knowledge, I struggle. And what I see is the general community, the river communities, the irrigation communities struggle to interpret that into what does it mean for them. And so on a committee that I was on, we were sitting around, and experienced irrigators were struggling to know what does the current flows mean? Are we going to get a flood this year because it's rained upstream? And when we asked the department, they said they couldn't predict more than 2 weeks ahead. And even then it was all qualified. So there's a need almost for a level of translation of information into a format that would answer the questions that the Interim Inspector General was getting in these public meetings. So that's what I'm on about, that there be some sort of easily understood, easily read summary each year that people could begin to rely on as an interpretation of all that technical information.
Thank you very much. And to you, Mr. Newman, you also said you'd like to see the Inspector General have more coverage of areas that are potentially already under a different agency. Things like the program slippage and actually monitoring the implementation of the Basin Plan, which is currently done through 5 yearly reviews through the Productivity Commission. Do you, is your assertion that that's not regular enough or transparent enough?
Yes, I think 5 years is very useful because quite a lot of the actions do take time to conceive, design, and subsequently implement. But looking at the implementation of the Basin Plan since 2012, there was a lot of tardiness in getting off the blocks of those projects, particularly the SD-LAM breed of projects. In particular, constraints relaxation been on the books for nearly a decade and practically nothing done. Now, without that outcome, the whole Basin Plan, well, it's jeopardised. I wouldn't go so far as say falls apart, because I think the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holders has been doing a pretty good job within the constraints that exist already. So should we look at it only once every 5 years, or should somebody be looking at it? I guess the Ministerial Council, roughly 6 monthly, they get a sort of a report and that becomes public domain. But it's not so transparent. I think a more thorough report on a whole suite of actions, and they're so interdependent. So if every year everybody was called to account about what progress they've made, I mean, just going back to New South Wales now with the difficulties in getting the SD-LAM projects, Menindee and Yanco, and now really we're going back to the drawing board, and on the face of it, it looks very good. But I am concerned about the way in which they are being promoted as SD-LAM projects, but don't necessarily provide adequate offsets. They're very useful projects. I'm sure they'll be very helpful. We have similar projects down here in South Australia. So once again, the short answer is yes, more thorough, detailed analysis on a yearly basis, and maybe that's the role of the Inspector General.
I want to get a bit more of an understanding of the interoperability, that, as you see it, of the Inspector General and the states, because as we are aware, the states are responsible for developing the water resource plans. The states are responsible for the licensed entitlements within their jurisdictions and the rules around those entitlements, and then how people can access water under those rules. And then the Inspector General is now he has a Commonwealth oversight of water access and water take, but it's still dependent on those state laws. How do you see, and Ms. Gray, maybe you would like to start, say the Inspector General role complementing in New South Wales, you're from Dubbo, the Natural Resource Access Regulator, for example?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. The idea of the Basin Plan, as we know, was to create these standardise the states so that things could be like for like, could be compared. And so these water resource plans were developed. But what we're seeing is trouble even getting those equal for state, for them. They're not like for like. When you look at the way Victoria does water resource plans, the way Queensland does them, and not to mention the trouble that New South Wales has had getting any accredited by the MDBA. So even at this basic level of having standard levels, a standard set of rules and plans so that there can be Commonwealth oversight from the states, that's an inherent problem to start with. So more uniformity in the water sharing plan, the water resource plans, would have been a great place to start there. So I see that as a huge challenge to even for the Inspector General to be starting off with. Yeah.
Can I come in on that?
Yes, thanks.
I totally agree with what Mel has just said. But the question about where that happens is really what I'm on about. Currently, the MDBA has the job of assessing those plans against the basin plan criteria, and they're probably in the right position to do that. But I've actually been involved within the MDBA, or particularly the previous MDBC, and I appreciate the pressure that happens in those interjurisdictional arrangements to tick the box and get it out of the way. So I think that Inspector General oversighting that process, not necessarily doing that process, but ensuring that it is done in accordance with all of the agreements, that's the auditing role that I would see as being interjurisdictional. But I go further. Your question related to the independent Inspector General and the states, and now we've brought in the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, but I would also bring in agencies like DOR, because I see some of the undermining of the outcome of the Basin Plan happening within DOR. So that reinforces to me the need for getting the Inspector General out of DOR.
Thank you, because my next question was going to be, what role do you see the Inspector General having on actually looking at the compliance and activities of state agencies, whether they're state agencies or Commonwealth agencies, including, for example, the MDBA in their river operations, and whether they're operating the river effectively and efficiently, and the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, and whether they're following their annual watering plans effectively and efficiently. And it's been raised with me, some of the assumptions about return flows and the formulas that are applied are not transparent, and people would like to see more information there. Has anyone got a comment on those issues?
If I may,
I
Senator.
could come in, but Anne.
Yes.
We'll go back to Jensen first and then Mr. Newman.
Thank you. The Independent Inspector General offers an opportunity for checking the progress by everybody. What we have seen up till now, it's been the Ministerial Council who's been receiving the reports, and we've seen timetables allowed to slip, deadlines have slipped by years in some cases, so that the Inspector General's role would be to say, here are all the targets, here are all the deadlines, all the things that should be done. And as an independent, everyone would need to be accountable, whichever Commonwealth or state department was supposed to do the job. So this seems to be offering us a new opportunity to keep the Basin Plan on target and on time.
Mr. Newman?
Yeah, well, exactly. I agree with what Anne has just said. It is a sort of an auditing role of commitments that have been made. And the Basin Plan is a very thorough act. It sets out all the requirements and it creates the opportunity for checklists and timeframes. So, yes, it's an auditing role. I don't see the Inspector General having the skills to cover all of those issues, but he needs to have the skills to ensure that they are covered and that they are put in the right place.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Did you have anything to add?
I could add that when the National Water Commission was decommissioned in 2014, 2015, we lost a lot of knowledge and experience and that oversight, and you know, we've lost a lot of ground, and things of water management has become more politically charged. It's become more problematic, and the environment is in a position where it's really on the back foot facing climate change because of the loss of that corporate knowledge that Bob was referring to. And that's a big thing locally on the ground. When we lose senior staff from positions in Water New South Wales, in departments, we lose such a lot. So I guess just a lament, I suppose, that and an acknowledgement of what we've all lost because the National Water Commission was defunded.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Senator Davey. Ms. Gray, in your opening statement, you made reference, very strong reference to this role and the concerns you have about the failure to investigate. I just want to unpack that a little bit more. And you spoke about that there wasn't strong enough legal levers on the failure to act. Would you like to just explain to the committee why that's so important, and has there been particular examples that you would like to share with the committee that brings you to the conclusion around why you think what you do about that?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. So there are international treaties that underpin the Water Act, such as the Ramsar Convention, and there are a long list of other migratory bird treaties that we have with South Korea, Japan, other places, Southeast Asia. So these are legal and moral requirements for all governments, state and federal, to protect the resilience of wetlands for the sake of these migratory birds. And there's not, so if there's a project, and an example that comes to mind is that there's a proposal to build a large re-regulating storage dam in the Macquarie River upstream of the Ramsar Macquarie marshes. So that if those international treaties and the Ramsar Convention had a place in the water sharing plan and the rules that manage the river, then this proposal wouldn't even be on the table. So there's not enough of a link between what happens on the ground every day and the plans that are made and the importance of those international treaties in the Water Act. So I guess if the Inspector General really, you know, it's great that they're forward-looking and can investigate, you know, cases that could potentially threaten Ramsar wetlands and other ecosystems, of course. But without a penalty for not acting and not investigating real issues that we have continually all the time, then that's a huge gap in the strength of these laws that are really needed to protect these very critical wetlands, and they've been declining significantly over the last couple of decades. Here in New South Wales, we believe we've lost 70% of the water bird population due to the decline in health of our wetlands. We see it all the time, this steady decline from from a wetland environment to a floodplain is happening before our eyes. And yeah, these laws that are there meant to protect these wetlands need to feed into the rules that are on the ground day to day.
You mentioned there's you've lost around 70% of the bird population. Is there any way you can provide to the committee those stats and what kind of birds?
Yeah,
Professor.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. Professor Richard Kingsford has got that. I'll find some reports. Yep.
If you could just take that question on notice. Thank you, Ms. Gray. I don't expect you to have it with you now, but that would be very helpful.
Senator?
Yeah.
Senator, it's Dr.
Discussions.
Jensen. If I could add something.
Sorry, Dr. Jensen. Yep.
Yes,
please.
in the Basin Plan, there was an interim target of no further decline in biodiversity from 2012 to 2019. And then from 2019, the target is to improve biodiversity, including water bird populations. So the Basin Plan failed to meet its interim target by a long way, and we're still in decline on so many of the parameters that we're supposed to be measuring. So that's part of what we're looking for in the reporting, hopefully from the Inspector General. And also, in support of what Mel was saying, in your explanatory memorandum, it actually states that depletion of water resources through unsustainable extraction, diversion and damming should be reduced. So again, it's surprising to see that we still have proposals for more dams. So we'd be looking for the Inspector General to be holding people to account where if proposals for dams come through, they have to be very much assessed for the impact on the river health as well as for whatever benefits are proposed.
Indeed, thank you, Dr. Jensen. I might
Could I quickly just add a comment there? Just building on what Mel and Anne have just said, and going back to the National Water Commission, that provided a really sound source of science, and science has continued, but there hasn't really been the health audits that we once had. So we used to have a Healthy Rivers audit, and I would just reinforce that those kind of losses are really fundamental to our understanding and to actually have the data to make those statements that have just been made.
Thanks, Mr. Newman. Can I just ask generally to each of you, are you aware of the amendments moved by the Nationals in the Senate on the 23rd of June, which sought to scrap the 450 GL target, legislate no more buybacks and scrap the 2024 deadline? Is that consistent?
No, I was not aware of that, and I would be greatly concerned. The 450 gigalitres was part of the agreements, the original agreements, and it's of benefit to the entire southern basin. So the fact that people are objecting to include that, but they'll take the offsets in the SDL projects, which were given in advance, but we're not seeing the offsets appearing. So it's all about the accounting across the entire package of the plan. So if we start losing elements of it, then the plan is further undermined. So we would be greatly concerned about any of those amendments going through.
And those amendments have been introduced as, and the reason behind it being consistent with the latest science. So is that, would that be the case, even though you've made reference, Dr. Jensen, to the initial agreement from the outset?
If you're saying that there's some science that backs not delivering the 450 gigalitres, I have not seen anything like that, and I would be really interested to know what it is.
Okay, I'm not saying it, I'm just repeating what the Nationals said in the Senate on the 23rd of June when they introduced the amendments. So I'm just trying to understand when they say that they've introduced the amendments by saying this is based or consistent with the latest science, you're saying that's not the case?
I'm
I
a
could
member
come in.
of the Society of Freshwater Scientists in Australia, and I don't believe any of my colleagues would say that less water coming through the system would be a good thing. We're struggling with the fact that the real water on the ground is a quarter of what we said was needed, so I can't believe that any scientist would be saying we don't need the 450, which was a compromised minimum amount in the first place.
Okay, that helps me to understand that then. Mr. Newman?
Well, I certainly agree. I'm not aware of any science that says that. There's certainly opinions that have talked about water going out to sea being wasted and the like. And there's really good, strong science. And the Basin Plan is fundamentally mounted on that science, a lot of which was done by the National Water Commission. So an important role for the Inspector General will be to answer the question that you've just asked. Is there any science? Is it credible? Is it peer reviewed? Does it make any sense in terms of changing the basis of the Basin Plan? So as ecology related people, we would agree with those that said that the original 3200 was only barely adequate to sort of retain the health of the basin, but not restore it. And so we would always argue, now we accept the Basin Plan and we accept it was a deal, but let's keep to the deal. Let's not undermine it by pseudoscience.
All right. We've run out of time, Mr. Newman and Ms. Gray and Dr. Jensen. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And if there's questions that you have taken on notice, please know that we do have a date for the return of those questions by close of business on Thursday, the 25th of November. Thank you for joining us, and I will pause for a break of our inquiry before we go on to another panel. So we will have a 15-minute break.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Senators.
We should commence our hearing. I will just introduce myself. I'm Senator McCarthy, and I'm acting chair today for this inquiry. We also have Senator Davey and Senator also on the inquiry today with us. So I'd like to certainly welcome all representatives here today. And we've got, assist me with my pronunciation here, but Coleambally Irrigation Cooperative Limited.
That's right, yep.
Thank you. Murray Irrigation and New South Wales Irrigators Council. And so for the Hansard record, I'd like to ask you to please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today, and also invite you to make a brief opening statement before the committee asks questions. I might go to Coleambally Irrigation Cooperative Limited first.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Jennifer McLeod. I'm Policy and Communication Manager with Coleambally Irrigation. So thank you for the opportunity to provide evidence to your committee, and I'm representing on behalf of Coleambally, commonly called CICL or Collie. So we're a member-owned irrigation infrastructure operator in southern New South Wales. We're an off-river gravity supply scheme. Since the early 2000s, we have invested in technology, including improved measurement and automation of our delivery system. And this investment has been in partnership with successive government initiatives to provide water for the environment. Our water supply is from the regulated Murrumbidgee, and we believe our irrigation supply system is an example of world's best practice for the efficient operation of an open earthen channel system that provides an efficient service to our members. Our members and customers are predominantly mum and dad farmers. They own relatively small farms, and our production systems are mainly annual crops with a focus on cotton, corn and rice. We support the creation of the Independent Inspector General, and we look forward to his office improving confidence and trust in the water sector, combined with the Independent Inspector's Office completing investigations on pieces of work that will add to build that trust and transparency around water issues. Our primary interest in the work of this committee is to prevent evidence that the committee should consider to introduce changes that would be required to the Act and the Basin Plan to make the Basin Plan a better plan. There have been over 40 reviews into aspects of the Basin Plan, and this alone should signal there is an opportunity to improve it. Our submission provided evidence of the challenges facing the final steps in implementation of the Basin Plan and the case for providing more flexibility and more time. Our submission used evidence produced by or for governments that we believe presents a compelling case for the introduction of some flexibility in the Basin Plan. The challenge is obvious. Completing the final pieces of the current Basin Plan in the time remaining is just not feasible. Our community does not want a polarising political debate. We want solutions that show respect for communities and irrigation farmers directly impacted by water recovery. In the Southern Basin, approximately 30% of the water that used to be in the consumptive pool is available for the environment. We need this pool of water to do its job, and that is going to take time. We believe we need more flexibility in the plan, not to walk away, but to recognise that in 2021, we know so much more than what we knew when the plan was made. Communities have a heightened awareness of the importance of water to not just the environment, but also their social and economic well-being. We know communities want to be involved in developing solutions, and some of the solutions envisaged in 2012 are not acceptable to a diverse number of communities, including riparian farmers. We know the impact of the buyback and the opening up of water markets in some communities and river systems has had significant impacts. And we also know that just adding water is not the only solution to the issues of making a more sustainable river system. So we need the discussion to shift from flow volumes to a better discussion about outcomes along the river system. Our community is living through this water reform. It impacts their daily lives, and we have also experienced the debilitating impacts of drought. And we continue to change to be more resilient. We believe the committee has an opportunity to make recommendations to the Water Act and Basin Plan that are constructive and will improve the Basin Plan's implementation. We're asking for our elected representatives to allow more flexibility and not expose our communities to additional uncertainty, buybacks, or the threat of a polarising debate if we under-deliver on some of the key milestones. And I note the recommendations from the MDBA Basin Plan Review in 2020, and they made two key recommendations, one related to the STL adjustment mechanism projects, and the second related to the scope for basin governments to propose new and innovative approaches to achieving the long-term sustainable limits for water use in the basin. And so we need the Act and the Basin Plan to have more flexibility so this can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McLeod. I'd like to go to the Murray Irrigation panel.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. My name's Phil Snowden. I'm a Director of Murray Irrigation. I'm supported by Phil Enley, our CEO, and Michael Pisasali, our Water Policy Manager. We've provided you with an opening statement and some supplementary information earlier this week, and if required, we're happy to provide additional information after today's session. We recognise the work plan and related legislation of the Inspector General, but believe it should be expanded further. I fully support what Kenny McLeod from Collie Amberley has just stated in regards to issues in her area. It was same for us. We acknowledge the strategic position of Murray Irrigation in the Southern Connected System and have demonstrated we want to work with governments and environmental interests to get better outcomes for everybody in the Southern Connector system. As outlined in our statement, we feel there is significant third-party impacts from water reform over a number of years with the Basin Plan and water market reform. This has been the biggest change to water management since Dartmouth Dam was built in the 1970s. What we would like you to acknowledge and understand that with these reforms, there is up to 50% more water now going to the bottom of the Murray system. And there's 50% less water being used in areas like ours. This has meant both direct and third-party impacts that are occurring in our region that are well documented. Jenny highlighted a few of them. Our submission highlights more. We were originally informed that these would not happen. This is a bipartisan plan and we were not supposed to have third-party impacts to remaining irrigators. With the Office of the Inspector General as an independent authority, it is important that they are provided with the resources and legislative support to be able to fully investigate, understand and independently quantify these issues so that they can be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snowden. Is there anyone else, Mr. Endley or Mr. Bassar, would you like to add anything extra there? You're just on mute. I do that too, don't worry.
So thank you for the opportunity, but I don't think I have anything to add to that opening statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to the New South Wales Irrigators Council.
Thank you very much. My name is Claire Miller. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the New South Wales Irrigators Council and are appearing today in that capacity, supported by the Council's Policy Manager, Christine Freak. So I'll just go through our opening statement, if I may. So thank you again very much for the opportunity to appear today. We pay our respects to the traditional owners of the lands and waters in all New South Wales irrigation regions. New South Wales Irrigators Council is the peak body representing the irrigation sector in New South Wales. We have member organisations in every Murray-Darling Basin Valley and several coastal valleys, and we represent more than 12,000 water users. Irrigation is a critically important industry. It provides more than 90% of Australia's fruit, nuts and grapes, more than 76% I should say, of vegetables, 100% of rice and more than 50% of dairy and sugar. Our industry operates in arguably the world's strictest regulatory environment. Water use is capped at sustainable limits, measured and prioritised to meet human and environmental needs first before farmers can get access to water. Australian irrigators are world leaders in water efficiency. DOR reports that Australian grown rice uses 50% less water than the global average, and Australian cotton growers are 3 times more efficient in their water use than the global average. Water reform has fundamentally changed basin communities and irrigated agriculture. Our industry now has the lowest ever water access since its development. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan alone has transferred 1 in every 5 litres of agricultural water back to the environment in a very short space of time in just 1 decade. That's 4 times the volume of water held in Sydney Harbour, and it has come at a significant cost to basin communities, as highlighted by the recent Sefton inquiry. It has to be acknowledged, though, that at the same time, the plan has produced important environmental benefits. Combined with earlier water recovery programs, the environment now owns 28% of irrigation water licences in the Southern Basin, in addition to river flows which make up the bulk of water. Maximising the benefits of this environmental water requires progress on key environmental projects under the plan, but very importantly, with community support. And this requires flexibility and adaptability to get it right. So just some important statistics to share about water usage. In the Southern Basin, just 43% of water is diverted. And that's not just for irrigators. That includes other important water uses, of course, such as towns, stock and domestic, and plantations. 47% of water in the Southern Basin is not diverted, and there's another 10% that's held in environmental licences. So the vast majority of water in the Southern Basin is available for the environment one way or another. In the Northern Basin, just 30% of water is diverted. Again, not just for irrigators, but for other users such as towns, stock and domestic, and including floodplain harvesting at the current levels, which will be cut back. So that means that 68% of water is undiverted, and there's another 2% of water on environmental licenses. So again, the environment already gets the vast majority of water, of inflows into the basin. It means that irrigated agriculture has a relatively small share of the total resource, and then this share fluctuates each year. Irrigators receive low or even zero allocations as water availability reduces during droughts. It means that when it comes to water sharing, irrigators are the first and the hardest hit by climate change. They're the last to receive water when water is available, after the environment and after towns and stock and domestic, and they are the first ones to have the tap turned off when conditions turn dry. And we are already seeing this impact. Irrigators in the New South Wales Murray were allocated on average 81% of their general security licence volume before the millennium drought, but now their licence reliability is only around 48%. Similarly, in the Namoi Valley in the Northern Murray-Darling Basin, reliability has declined from 77% to around 39%. These trends reflect the fact that annual average inflows have almost halved across the basin over the last 20 years, although there are also policy drivers that are making that impact much worse than it needs to be. Outside of legislation, New South Wales Irrigators Council is proud to be pursuing positive programs and partnerships, including with First Nations for cultural flows, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and water stewardship. We think this is the way forward for water management, to work together to achieve environmental and other outcomes without unduly adverse impacts on our basin communities. New South Wales supports the legislation formally establishing the position of the Inspector General. The New South Wales submission to this inquiry therefore primarily focuses on the item any potential further amendments to improve the operation of the Act and any related matters regarding necessary legislative amendments to improve implementation of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. The recommended legislative instruments in our submissions are based on the recommendations from more than 40 reviews of the Basin Plan, which have provided a substantial evidence base to improve the plan's implementation. As the Productivity Commission said in 2018, it has been a real achievement for basin governments to get this far, but without these recommended changes, the implementation of the Basin Plan is at risk. New South Wales Irrigators Council has concerns that the Basin Plan's rigidity is preventing critical, necessary and informed changes, despite multiple reviews making consistent recommendations. We need informed, constructive and bipartisan discussion on improvements to the legislation to ensure it can be flexible and adaptive to incorporate the lessons learnt so far and the recommendations of experts. Our key points, therefore, is legislative amendments to provide flexibility to ensure fit-for-purpose timeframes to implement the plan, linked to improved implementation arrangements to meet progress milestones. We need legislative amendments to allow for new and improved SIDLAM projects to be introduced into the mix. Legislative amendment to remove the requirement for buybacks if SIDLAM projects fall short in 2024. We want to see the legislative cap on buybacks remain, and we would like to see the BEMDBA conduct a business case on investing the funding allocated for the 450 gigalitres in Upwater to go instead into complementary measures. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Miller. Mr Briggs, did you want to add anything, or is that your combined statement?
Thank you for the opportunity. That's our combined statement, so I'll leave it with Claire.
All right, thank you. I'll go to Senator Davey.
Thank you all for appearing today and giving your time, and thank you for your comprehensive opening statements. I appreciate the fact that most of you, based on the opening statements and on your submissions, most of you are happy and comfortable with the role of the Inspector General. However, you've got issues with the ongoing implementation of the Basin Plan. Would I be paraphrasing accurately?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep, that's correct.
Coming to you, Ms. Miller, with your recommendations for legislative amendments. The final comment you just said about the funding for the 450 upwater to go to complementary measures. Can you unpack that a bit for us? Because we have heard, in fact, just from the panel before yours, that the need for the 450 was, in their opinion, a not negotiable, and it was part of the original agreement. There have, through the years, there have been varying interpretations of when that agreement was reached, how it was reached. But can you explain what we would be getting if we diverted the funding to complementary measures, and how it would it still achieve the objectives of the Water Act, which is the biggest concern people have?
The objectives in the Water Act are about achieving environmental outcomes. They're not about a specific volume of water with the idea that that specific volume of water is the only way to achieve those outcomes. The issue with the 450 is that it was a last-minute political agreement. It was brought in and decided long after community consultation had ended, so there was no real opportunity for the community across the basin to interrogate and investigate and consider the implications of it. It is a voluntary program, so it might have been a political promise, that's true, but the fact is that in the Basin Plan itself, it is very clearly a voluntary participation program, and if people don't want to participate, you can't force them. So that is why we have that review, the WESA review, very clear that not enough people have wanted to sign up, not enough farmers, to get anywhere near the 450. The other part of the Basin Plan, which is often misunderstood, is that you don't need to get 450 to achieve the outcomes, if this is about environmental outcomes of the Basin Plan, and that is the CIDLAM projects and the CIDLAM Sustainable Diversion Limit Adjustment Mechanism, which allows for, it has a formula in there where you can adjust the SDL plus or minus 5%. And so that means that really to meet the objectives of the Basin Plan, you need to get at least 62 gigalitres of that 450, which along with the supply measures, the 605 or the 650 at the CIDLAM measures, achieves the environmental objectives of the Basin Plan. So it is not set in stone that another 450 gigalitres in entitlements is necessary to achieve the environmental objectives. We know from experience, this is what we learn over 10 years of implementation from the Basin Plan too, is do you actually need that 450 to achieve environmental objectives when we know from 2019 drought, which was very severe, had very similar inflow and other conditions to the last year of the Millennium Drought when the lower lakes were in a terrible state. A repeat of the same conditions in 2019, despite those critically and distressingly dry conditions, the lower lakes still met every KPI in the Basin Plan with the water that has already been achieved. That was salinity levels, freshness levels, level above sea level. So I think I would always just interrogate the difference between what people want based on a promise made 10 years ago and actually take a very cool and critical look at what are the environmental objectives that we are already achieving with the water that's already been recovered. The reason that we would think that there is more bang for your buck in putting that money into complementary measures is that there's also, you could go and try and get that 450, but right now you can't deliver it to best environmental effect unless you address constraints, and you better manage those. With climate change, you may not even be able to achieve some of those overbank flows that are envisaged, even if you manage to deal with constraints. So then we need to be looking at projects that are going to deliver the best environmental outcomes, ones such as the Murray Irrigation Limited proposal, which I will let them describe, but where you actually sort of use existing infrastructure to get water into places that you won't otherwise be able to get it into and get those environmental benefits. And you can put a lot more water down that river, but if you don't deal with things like cold water pollution, fish bay passages, the staggering, biomass of carp completely displacing habitat availability for native fish, it's basically wasted water, to be blunt. It's billions of dollars spent on recovering environmental water that's not going to get the outcome, the actual objectives of the basin plan. So that is a very long answer to why we are supporting and think that if this really is about environmental outcomes and not just a rigid idea of a model that spits out a volumetric number, then put the money into the complementary measures that are going to achieve those environmental outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. And just quickly, do Murray Irrigation or Collie Amberley have any further comments on that?
I think if I might speak, I'm CEO of Murray Irrigation, and I really welcome the comments made about the project we put forward. It is designed to achieve outcomes within a region which contains many diverse opportunities for the use of environmental water, which has gone very dry over a series of decades. It's highly efficient, uses existing infrastructure, does require some more development work, and we have an application in at the moment for that sort of funding to start that process. It's supported by many agencies through the basin, and I'm delighted that our colleagues at this hearing today also support it. We regard this as one of the signposts for the future, where we actually aim to achieve the maximum efficient use of environmental water. Thank you.
Ms. McLeod, you're on mute, Mrs. McLeod. No.
Saying of the year, isn't it? If I could just add, I support the comments that Claire and Phil have made. And for the advocates of the 450, I think we need to draw attention to the comments or the substance of Robbie Sefton's report. I think if we look at the highest level and think that we can take another 450,000 megalitres of wet water out of the Southern Murray-Darling Basin and not have absolutely devastating impacts on the social and economic fabrics of communities and industries. And I'm talking about even not necessarily our community, but communities further downstream that have shifted to large-scale permanent plantings. If you sort of roll forward and look at the amount of water that might be available in the consumptive pool in dry years with that 450,000 megs or the equivalent entitlement volume no longer available, it does not paint a pretty picture at all. And I think we have a responsibility as basin communities to recognise that we need a different way of addressing the challenges facing us rather than just held environmental water.
Thank you. I'm very cognizant of time, Chair. I've just got one other question that I want to put to this panel, because the issue of compliance and the Inspector General is the important one. One of the areas that he will also be looking at is the compliance of maintaining extraction at or below the sustainable diversion limit. What would you say? Do you believe that can be achieved or is being achieved at the existing water recovery? So where we're at, do you think we'll be able to comply with the sustainable diversion limits? And if that's the case, is there justification for further water recovery if we're already operating within those limits?
So I might try and answer the question, Senator. Phil Snowden, Murray Irrigation. My understanding is we are well under that limit now. So we've got a significant underuse of the available water in the system for New South Wales general security because of the third-party impacts, later allocations and all of those sort of aspects that are coming about as a result of this water reform. So my understanding is we're well and truly under it.
Yeah, and in addition to that, the latest, so the sustainable diversion limits have been in place, and they are in place already at the moment, and states are already required to comply with those. The MDBA publishes reports at the end of each water year, which looks at states' compliance with those limits. And as Murray Irrigation has just said, for New South Wales, every valley bar one was found to be under their sustainable diversion limit, and the one valley that was above was due to a modelling error rather than an actual additional amount of take. So the actual problem that we have with water usage at the moment, it's not about going over the sustainable diversion limits. The non-compliance at the moment is actually being so far below them that our industry isn't actually able to reach those sustainable diversion limits because of all of these various policy drivers that have now come into place.
So based on that, there is, and that's an interesting way to look at it. So if the government continues down the path of water recovery, extractions will fall well below. Would there then be a call from industries for rule changes to give them the capacity and the flexibility to actually reach those the sustainable diversion limit?
Yeah, and that's something that we're calling for already at the moment. In our view, the sustainable diversion limit is something that we should be able to use up to. That is the limit. And if there is a consistent long-term trend that we are below that, then governments absolutely need to be working with industry to be finding ways that we can reach that limit. So the issue really is it's not one of overusage, it's one of underusage at the moment with our industry.
Ms McLeod, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I do have a comment. Just don't interpret, because we're below the SDL at the moment, doesn't mean to say that you can assume that, well, we don't need to recover any more water because they're below the SDL anyway. What we need, what our view is that we should be able to divert up to the sustainable diversion limit. And what we don't want to have is a gap between the volume that's been recovered for the environment when they do the adjustment mechanism. So instead of having our current SDL, they actually lower it further, but they don't actually recover any water to meet that, whatever that volume is. So okay. Just a point of clarification.
I'm just very aware of time, and I'm sure that the chair has some questions, so I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Senator Davey. And just to alert the panel that I am having a few IT issues, so if I do get cut off, I will certainly be sending questions on notice past this. I'd like to just ask more broadly, have any of you or your members had interactions with the Office of Compliance or the Inspector General?
Yes, Phil Snowden from Murray Irrigation here. Yes, we have had a good working relationship with him, and that's where our understanding comes from, that his work plan doesn't go far enough to address the fundamental issues.
Okay, so what is the feedback you're receiving about the IG's Office of Compliance?
They've got a big work plan, and we fully support what they are doing in respect of that. So as far as the compliance and the metering and the accounting of the water and that sort of thing, I'm just not sure that they have the capacity or the legislative power to actually go a step further and really get into the heart of the issues that are impacting on our region.
Okay, and are you in a position where you would refer reports of water theft or other rule breaches to the IG?
Would we report that? Absolutely, if we thought it was an issue. But the way our system is managed from a Murray Irrigation point of view, it's all remote control, and it's monitored, every section of the channel and everything else, and we can't extract water out of an outlet without ordering it, and you can't order it unless you've got water in your account. So.
I'll just refer to the other panellists if you'd like to respond to any of those questions.
Yeah, we've had a very good working relationship with the Inspector General to date. We've found him very responsive to issues that we raise. On the question of compliance, we haven't referred those ourselves to him because, of course, New South Wales has the Natural Resources Access Regulator. Now, that regulator, NRA, is very active on the ground. They have compliance officers everywhere. They are extremely transparent in their activities. They have an interactive map where you can go on and it will identify every type of infringement, where it's happened, when it happened, what sort of action was taken. It's worth noting there that despite widespread sort of public perception that water theft is widespread in New South Wales, that is not borne out by the actual statistics. So NRA, since its formation in 2018, has issued penalty notices and prosecutions for water theft in only 89 cases. That's 89 out of 12,000 water users. That's a rate of about 0.74% for water theft. So, you know, their experience has been that despite a few high profile cases that of course get headlines in the media, generally water theft is just not widespread across. But if we had, we know that there is capacity though, if we felt that, or if NRA was not doing its job or that further oversight was needed, that we can go to the Inspector General and ask for that. I'll just refer across to my colleague Christine. Just there's a couple of other issues that we're dealing with the IG as well.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So as I said, the issues directly relating to water theft in the first instance are matters for NRAL, and as Claire said, they're very active in the work that they do. So we haven't had to refer any water theft type matters to the Inspector General. The matters that we have been working with the Inspector General on are more to do with state policy implementation type issues. So two of those in particular. One is the implementation of New South Wales's new metering framework and some of the barriers to compliance that irrigators have been facing due to things like market supply issues of metering equipment, lack of availability of people to install the devices, or mobile black spots to connect telemetry equipment. So we've been working with the Inspector General to, as part of a review into the implementation of that particular program, to make sure that it's best practice policy implementation and that water users aren't being unfairly impacted throughout that, and particularly that these barriers are made public and transparent as well. So that particular work continues. We're also working with the Inspector General. We've alerted them to issues surrounding the management of water above long-term average annual extraction limits, and making sure that states receive consistent treatment in the way that water above that particular limit is managed in terms of negotiations between the state and the Commonwealth. And I guess just making sure that compliance standards in regards to SDL compliance, etc., are done consistently across the basin states.
Okay.
The context to that is that you know, they in several really key areas we've found that the each state is held to account against its own standards rather than one standard across the entire basin that all states are measured against. And so that's something we've asked the Inspector General to have a look at. It's really important that there's one rule for all states.
Okay. All right. And can I just ask before we conclude, I think Ms. Miller, you mentioned in your opening statement partnerships with First Nations for cultural flows. Do you want to just share with the committee what you mean about that and some examples?
Yeah, I'll refer across to Christine, but just quickly, we have a First Nations advisor, Feely McHughes, who is a Gomeroi man. We have been working with Feely on a project that we're trying to get up in the Northern Basin that's aimed at closing the gap through culturally appropriate employment. And I guess in white people's terms, we would call it natural resource management, but it's really all about closing the gap, as I say, through culturally appropriate employment. I'll just hand across to Christine to fill that out.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So we've been working with Feely now for a number of years. He's our sort of first ever formally appointed First Nations advisor, and we work quite closely with him to inform all of our policy discussions, because from our perspective, we fully support First Nations water rights and access, and it's something that we want to be part of the solution on working together for. So it is something that we take very seriously, and we spend a lot of our work on as well. The particular program that Claire's referring to, it's a Billabong restoration project. So through our discussions with Delhi and through the Northern Basin Aboriginal Nations, we've become aware that the Billabong is a particularly important site for cultural purposes. And one of the challenges is that a lot of these sites are on private farmland properties. So we're undertaking what is quite a groundbreaking collaboration between First Nations and irrigators to get access to these sites, but also to provide water onto the sites so that local First Nations communities can work with the farmers on restoring these particular sites, also generating employment and income for them as well. In addition to that, we're also working on some broader policy recommendations to do with First Nations water access. So as you may be aware, the Productivity Commission in their recent review of national water reform identified First Nations water rights as one of the key challenges. And that's something that we'd like to be involved in providing options for possible solutions to, work with the relevant First Nations communities to find ways forward on. And in particular, I think there's a lot of opportunity looking at the water above our long-term average annual extraction limit. So that's the vast majority of water. In every New South Wales basin valley, that's over 50% of the water. In some, that's over 75% of the water. So that's an incredibly significant share of water, which we believe can be better managed for cultural outcomes and by First Nations people to really make some progress in this space, because there's a lot of opportunity for it to happen. And I think we need to work together and put our minds to it around how we can achieve some of these outcomes.
I think we've just lost Senator McCarthy there to the IT issues, but I think the message she said was she might just put the rest on notice on behalf of the opposition. So I'm not sure if Senator Davey just wanted to add anything else there before we finish up with the witnesses.
Yes, I might just ask a final question while we've got the time, and just to come back to an issue that Senator McCarthy was asking with regards to the Inspector General, and I've asked previous panels as well. How do you see the interoperability between the Inspector General and the state jurisdictions in regards to compliance and water take? And also, do you see his role as also needing to have a look at and ensure the compliance of government agencies, including the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder and indeed the river operators, to make sure that they are operating efficiently, effectively and with full accountability?
Well, from our perspective, in New South Wales, given that we have NRA looking after the water theft matters, the greatest additional role of the Inspector General from our perspective is in that later point around looking at the agencies and the work that they're undertaking in compliance with the relevant laws and policy requirements. And because we've got NRA in place, that is our sort of primary compliance and enforcement agency, and would expect other states to have similarly strong and robust agencies to do water enforcement and compliance as well. So for us, the largest part would be for the Inspector General to step in to that only in the circumstances that there was concern that NRA, wasn't acting appropriately, but we don't have any reason to believe that at this point in time. So really the role comes down to looking at agencies and water management generally.
If I could just add to that, we would say the Inspector General has an important role in identifying where there needs to be improved consistency in the approach between states. So we've got a compliance compact currently. I think there's significant opportunity for improvement and greater consistency between the states. And in terms of your second point around the actions of government agencies and the MDBA, we would agree that there's an opportunity for the Inspector General to have a role there to ensure that they are acting consistently and as they're required to do by their legislation.
Thank you. I know we're at the end of this session, and we probably have online our next witnesses. So I'd like to thank you all again for your time. We'll work with the chair and see if we can get her back online before we move on to our next panelist. But thank you all. The chair will have some further questions, which she will put to you on notice, and that notification will include the deadline by which responses are expected and required.
Thanks very much, Senators.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators.
Yeah.
Are the next witnesses available, Jerry? Or shall we suspend for a few minutes?
No, the next witnesses should be, or at least one of the representatives from the National Irrigators Council is online, so we can go to that.
Good morning, Mr. Jeffries from National Irrigators Council. The acting chair, Senator McCarthy, has just is having some IT issues. She will be back online soon. I'm Senator Perrin Davey from New South Wales. So I will, I'll open, I'm also joined online by Senator Raf Ciccone from Victoria. But we will proceed because we've got, we want to ensure that we run to schedule. So we will open up, everything will be recorded, and it is, will be published on Hansard. So if you would like, have you got an opening statement you'd like to make?
Good afternoon, Senator, and thank you. And our chair, Jeremy Morton, is supposed to be joining us as well. So he may be having some technical problems as well. So hopefully he'll join us soon too. But yes, I do have an opening statement. So my name's Isaac Jeffrey, and I'm the CEO of the National Irrigators Council. NIC is the peak national body for irrigators both inside and outside the Murray-Darling Basin. Now, Senator, water is our most precious resource. We'll face a future where we'll see hotter and drier climate conditions and more extreme weather events. We'll see longer and more painful droughts, but also intense periods of rainfall which our system may not be able to handle. We'll also see extremes like tornadoes, cyclones, and crop-destroying hail. As less water comes into the system in the future, communities, First Nations, the environment, and irrigators will all be impacted. Irrigation communities have shouldered the costs and risks associated with water reform to date, but these, costs will need to be shared going forward, and risks will need to be shared going forward. Less water in the system will mean less water for everyone. Difficult choices may need to be made, but I would ask the committee to remember the following. 100% of Australian rice is grown using irrigation. 90% of our fruit, nuts and grapes, over 76% of our vegetables, over 70% of our cotton, and over 50% of our dairy and sugarcane is produced by irrigators. The irrigated ag sector does all of this in a more efficient way, using less water and under more stringent regulations than our international peers, all while generating over $18 billion for our economy. I'm sure senators will have specific questions about the Act and the Basin Plan, but I'd like to make these points. NIC remains committed to completing the basin plan and to delivering the triple bottom lines for communities, the environment and the economy, including First Nations. Irrigators and irrigation communities have delivered on their commitments, often through trying and heartbreaking circumstances, and governments need to do the same. The basin plan is an adaptive document, but the stringent focus on volumes over outcomes has created rigidity which doesn't address the physical constraints and limitations of the system and the actual outcomes we're trying to achieve. NIC has welcomed the appointment of the Inspector General, and we believe it's vitally important for strong compliance mechanisms to be in place for all stakeholders. The Inspector General's focus on accountability and transparency is very welcomed, and being independent will ensure the office can review the operations of river managers and state regulators and hold them to account for their decisions. From an industry point of view, there's no place within the industry for those who willfully do the wrong thing. But I would note that the vast majority of people are doing the right thing. As mentioned by New South Wales Irrigators Council just recently, NRA, the state regulator, has penalised just 89 cases of water theft since its inception in 2018. That's just 0.74% of the 12,000 water users in New South Wales. Finally, as I mentioned at the start, water is our most precious resource, and as a national body, we believe that bipartisanship and collaboration is needed to manage it going forward. NIC hopes the Inspector General can help information flows across borders and to return trust to the system and to the vast amount of water users who are doing the right thing. With that in mind, I'm happy to take your questions. Thanks, Senators.
Okay, Senator Perrin-Davey, thank you for introducing Mr. Jeffrey to the panel, and I apologise, Mr. Jeffrey, for an IT problem up here on Larrakia country in Darwin. So thank you for joining us, and certainly to our previous panellists as well, if they are still listening or watching. I do want to say thank you, and hope I can get the remainder of your comments in relation to First Nations partnerships that you were speaking about when I got cut off. So, Mr. Jeffrey, I might just go to some of the questions I actually had previously as well, just to start with, if I could, just on the whether you or your members had interactions with the Office of Compliance or the Inspector General.
Yes. Hello, Senator. Thank you. And I'm not sure whether you heard before, but I apologise on behalf of our chair. He is, I think, trying to join as well, but might be having some IT problems too. Senator, yes, we have met with the Inspector General, and he has done some roundtables with our membership, both to introduce himself and his role and the role that his office will be playing, as well as a very high level sort of public overview of what reviews the office is currently undertaking or about to undertake. So yes, we have met with him a couple of times now, and yeah, have found him to be very open and honest and very focused on what he's going to achieve or trying to achieve.
And what is the feedback you're receiving about the Inspector General and the Office of Compliance? Are you receiving any feedback from members?
Yeah, from my perspective and from the members who I have discussed it with, all very welcoming of the appointment of the Inspector General and the role that the office will be playing going forward. Also, the number of reviews that he does have, that they do have underway, have been welcome. I think the other opportunity that's been presented to members and to the community, across the community, is that opportunity to write in with suggestions of things that may need to be reviewed, and I've found them to be very, and we found them, to be very open and accepting of those, and willing to do what they can to look into those issues.
And Mr. Jeffries, are you in a position where you would refer reports of water theft or other rule breaches to the Inspector General?
Yes, we would certainly report any of those issues through to the relevant regulators. It's not something that we would normally come across. It's not really our sort of role, or that really wouldn't come up, I don't think, with us. But if we did, we would certainly refer them to the proper authorities to look into them.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. These are fairly standard questions. It just assists with us as we're looking at the legislation. So I'm going to go to Senator Davey now. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. I too have questions that I've been putting to all witnesses today. And you're, as a national organisation, you have members from all jurisdictions. Have you considered or looked at how the Office of the Inspector General will operate in conjunction with the other jurisdictions? Because particularly when it comes to looking at or reviewing instances of water theft, he has to look at it as under state law, because it's the state law that determines the water access rules. So have you had a conversation with him or with your members about how that interoperability will look, and whether you think that it is complementary or whether it could actually be a clash?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Yes, look, I think that water policy is one of the most complicated public policy areas in the country, and the Basin Plan itself is one of the most comprehensive and complex water management systems in the whole world, made further complicated, I guess, by the fact that we do have multiple jurisdictions and multiple levels of government within those jurisdictions who have all got a role to play in this space. So I think that anything that can be done to clear up some of those reporting lines, to bring some additional accountability and transparency to the system is a good thing. And I think that anything that helps with the flow of information across borders, potentially even harmonisation of some rules potentially, or even just terms, because there are a lot of things that are the same across jurisdictions but have different meanings and different terms. I think if he can provide that sort of role, it would be very beneficial. I would also like to point out that one of the key roles that NIC sees the Inspector General having going forward is the ability to be able to look at what the river